to it, and they don't even bother to send an investigator to look at it. So how good could their investigation be? So that really wasn't legitimate investigation. That was merely a public relations stunt that cost $500,000 to get the Air Force out of the investigation of UFOs business. But what we find out later is there was something called Project Moondust. Moondust was designed to recover returning or space debris returning to Earth from unknown origins, which of course could be extraterrestrial. So when that name leaked into the public arena, and the Air Force was queried about it, they said, "No, there's no Project Moondust. It never existed. We've never done that." The State Department inadvertently, the U.S. State Department inadvertently released a number of documents that clearly said Project Moondust on it. Clearly, we have a provenance. Clearly, it came from the State Department. We know this, unlike MJ-12. It's been verified by a number of researchers. I even got a set of microfiche with Project Moondust stuff on it. This stuff was given to a United States Senator by Cliff Stone, and the Senator went back to the Air Force and said, you know, here's the evidence that Moondust was investigating UFOs. The Air Force response was, well, yeah, we did have a Moondust, but we never used it. Well, the documents from the State Department proved that Moondust had been used. Robert Todd, another researcher living in Pennsylvania, queried the Air Force about this and asked for the new name and was told, we can't give it to you, it's properly classified. So as of 1986, we knew that A, there had been a project that had gone beyond Blue Book called Moondust that that was interested in UFOs because there was UFO stuff in their files. In 1986, the code name was changed from Moondust, and we were told the code name could not be released. So there was clearly an investigation that went that far. If we go to the 1990s, we got the Air Force investigating Roswell. Well, I thought the Air Force didn't investigate UFOs. Well, now they're investigating UFOs again, saying, well, there's nothing to it. It was just a Project Mogul balloon. You guys are mistaken, and went on from there. So there's these sorts of projects that we know they existed. We've got the documentation to prove they existed. It's really no secret. Those things were authentic.
How about Project Blue Fly? Is that a continuation after Moondust?
That was Operation Blue Fly. Was actually the mission to move the Moondust people around. So Operation Blue Fly was sort of the logistical support for Project Moondust. So Blue Fly existed in that arena. So if you needed to go somewhere for an investigation, it was Operation Blue Fly that took you there to conduct your Moondust investigations.
So do you know what's going on today? Are there new names and new operations, new projects at work? Or as you said, alluded to before, has this all been moved into the kind of public relations type offices of how you deal with the public, so to speak, more than actually retrieving UFOs?
One thing I should make clear is that while Blue Book was became a public relations mission, there was other things going on to suggest that the UFO investigations were taken seriously under different auspices. General Exxon talked about how he would get a phone call from the Pentagon telling him that there would be X number of people coming in from various locations to Wright Field. A plane would be dispatched from Wright Field to a hot UFO investigation. This was done so that if any reporters got smart and traced the aircraft back, they could get it to Wright Field. They said, well, that was Project Blue Book. But there was another investigation going on under different auspices to investigate these things. General Bolander said in 1960 that the UFO cases, some of the UFO cases, the really inexplicable UFO cases, were not part of the Blue Book system. And Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was a consultant of Blue Book, said that the good stuff never got to Blue Book. So while Blue Book was in operation, there was a concurrent investigation going on under a different name with different personnel to investigate the really interesting UFO stuff.
How about that? That's very interesting. And again, just to reiterate, that all of this then seemed to have been spawned out of the Roswell crash, and so much is circled around this particular event. But you mentioned something before, and you go into detail, I guess, about this in your new book, Crash, as well, then, that this phenomena does not only, it's a modern phenomena. We look at it back to 1947 here, but you mentioned a case back all the way back to 840 AD in France before?
looking at what I want to do in the book Crash, because these lists of UFO crashes are close to 300. And I just find it incredible that you've developed a technology that allows you to travel interstellar distances, and about the time you arrive, you crash. It just doesn't make sense.
That's right.
And if you look at our evolution of technology, you'll see how the mean time to failure has increased, so that the devices we build today are much more reliable than the devices we built 50 years ago. And so I wanted to look at that, and there's a number of stories in UFO books about this event that took place in 840 AD in France that sounds suspiciously like some of the contact details from the 1950s. And that when you look at the different ways it was portrayed, it's nearly not nearly as mysterious as you would think. And so I wanted to explore that. There was another event that took place in the 16th century that sounds suspiciously like ball lightning, and yet it's recounted in some of the UFO books as if it was another crash. So I looked at those sorts of things and said, this is where we are. But when we get to 1947, and in the book it actually talks an awful lot about there's a lot of the ghost rocket cases, some of them not very, very exciting, some of them very exciting, from the 1946, a lot of that in Scandinavia, some of it in Europe. And then, of course, the emphasis switches to the United States. And because I happen to be located in the United States, I have an opportunity to investigate these a lot more thoroughly than I can some of the other events in other locations around the world. But we're looking at all of those sorts of things up through the event that took place in 2009. And what was interesting, this took place in July of 2009 in Ottawa. And Chris Rakowski and I were at the MUFON convention in Denver, Colorado in August. And I got home and found this, and I'm finishing up the book to get it turned in, and I found this crash from Canada. So I wrote to Chris about it, and he sent me all the information I could possibly want about it. And so he wasn't very excited about it at all, and so we took that tack. But so we moved from 840 AD to basically July of 2009, looking at a lot of events. Some events I just didn't bother with because they clearly were meteorites. Some of those are clearly meteorites. I did look at. There's a crash case in the Project Blue Book files I'd never heard of, and I blundered across that looking for something else. So that's recounted in there. This event that took place in Oregon, I believe, where they found some debris. I think the debris they found is all terrestrially based, but here was something that was recounted in the Project Blue Book file. So I said, well, here's my source of material, Project Blue Book, on this crash. What's interesting in the Project Blue Book files, I've only been able to find a single mention of the Roswell crash, and there are other cases that were clearly hoaxes that are recounted in the Blue Book files. But in the Roswell case, I could only find one mention. It's a middle paragraph of a 3-paragraph article in another case file, and all it does is mention that Walter Haut had received a blistering rebuke for his reporting of the UFO crash at Roswell. It's all I can find in the Project Blue Book files about this. Other cases that are clearly hoaxes are in the Project Blue Book files, but this case, which the Air Force said was a mogul balloon, somehow, even though it was front-page news around the country, around the world, Walter Haut talks about getting phone calls from Europe and Asia and Australia. That somehow wasn't mentioned in the Project Blue Book files, which I find fascinating. But the book looks at all of that stuff. There's a good section on Blue Book. There's a section on the Las Vegas UFO crash. A lot of stuff about Kecksburg, thanks to the fellow Stan Gordon, who has investigated that for years. Stuff on the Sag Harbor stuff that I got from Don Ledger and Chris Stiles, which they're very, very helpful on. So it's just a compendium of a look at all that. It's my take on this and why I accept these cases as being legitimate, why these cases I think are probably